Welcome to Being Human in the Age of AI, The Coaching Lens, a new podcast series produced by Deborah Grant of Grant Global Coaching and Consulting. As AI transforms the way we work and interact with one another, it also invites us to ask deeper questions about what it is to be human. Today's guests are Veronica Nieto and Stuart Ashman, two professionals with front row seats to the human side of AI. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin. So let's just go around and introduce ourselves. So I'm Deborah Grant. I come from a radio background, and also I was marketing and technology for many years. I am bilingual and bicultural. I was born and raised in Japan. I speak Japanese fluently. That informs a lot of what I do and how I see the world. And we have two other people on the show today who are also multicultural. And why don't you start, Veronica? Veronica Nieto, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm Veronica. I am also not multicultural. I am actually from Mexico, born and raised in Mexico, but I guess I could say I am multicultural because it's around nine and a half when I moved to the United States. So I have had that culture clash and that acculturation between the Mexican culture and the American culture. My background is in human resources, but not just human resources, but I've worked in social sciences before, behavioral therapy. I've done a little bit of the education system. And also did academic advising before I started my journey in the talent advisor position that I am currently in.
Stu Ashman, please introduce yourself.
I'm Stuart Ashman, originally a Brit. I came to Canada 21 years ago, so not too much of a cultural difference between those two countries. And ironically, I live in British Columbia in Canada, so that kind of says a lot too. I spent most of my career in software engineering, most of it being in software quality engineering.
Well, one reason that I named this show Being Human in the Age of AI is because it's on all of our minds, I think, lately. I was just wondering how each of you have experienced this last few years where AI has become such an important part of our everyday.
I mean, AI has been around longer than most people have kind of had it as a household kind of, topic to talk about. I think it's had quite a dramatic effect. I think as humans, we always desire magic, like we look for magic in things. And I think whenever some new technology, kind of comes along that appears in some way to be magical, to do things or be capable of things or to augment in a way that feels kind of otherworldly, then I think that's kind of how AI is perceived by a lot of people. Like, you ask AI questions and it has all the answers kind of idea.
Yes, and some of them are right and some of them are wrong. How about you, Veronica?
Yes. So I totally agree with Stu. Definitely, AI has also influenced the workplace in different ways. It's definitely changing the way our teams communicate, make decisions, and analyze data throughout the process. In my perspective, AI is not going to fully replace humans on the side of the leadership, but it's going to increase the need for human-centered skills like emotional intelligence, the communication, the self-awareness, and critical thinking.
I've gotten some great advice from AI. Things really, I found Erickson that way. I asked Erickson a list of questions, the prompts. What's the best organization? It has to be international. It has to be all these criteria. I gave it. It came up as absolutely accurate. It has been very life-changing in a way. I don't know if I ever would have found Erickson without that help because it was so sophisticated in the way it really qualified what I was looking for so quickly. Probably more quickly than anyone I knew to have asked in person as a human. So yeah, it's really, it's kind of mind blowing, honestly, even in my own life. But what is it doing to critical thinking? And I love that phrase, critical thinking. Sometimes we don't hear it enough anymore these days.
So if you think about it, our critical thinking, depending on the individual and how they're going to be using it, it's either going to be to an advantage or it's going to be a negative for them.
How about you, Stu? Because you're really working with people who are so past that, maybe that feeling of how bizarre AI can be sometimes, I would imagine. But where do you bump into that same kind of, uh-oh, or do you ever have that feeling?
Definitely. And I think, the critical thinking piece is a very important part of that. So as human beings, we all have, a bias of confirmation, right? So confirmation bias is it's normally known. And that means that we're tending to believe what we're told, what we read, what we hear. And so, whether it's in technology or otherwise, when you use AI as a tool and say like, hey, can you write this code? Can you, analyze this data, whatever it is, we're predisposed, if you like, to believe the answers that it comes back with. And I think it's because it can do that very quickly and because it can do it very effectively of a very large, kind of scope, whether it's, size of data set or whether it's size of problem, complexity of problem. It can be more powerful than we would be able to do, certainly in that same space of time. Like it might take us, a week to do something that AI can produce in seconds. And so that confirmation bias is almost amplified. It's made worse by the speed of that response. And so we have to get really a lot better at critically thinking and saying like, how do I trust the output? As Veronica was saying, it is a bit of an easy button from a lot of folks, right? They'll use AI to basically do their work and just, somewhat blindly accept what AI produces. But ironically, if you get good at using any tool, but in this case, AI, you can actually get it to help you with the critical thinking.
I can relate to that because I've been always sort of a writer in some form. A lot of marketing people are sort of frustrated writers in some ways. So for me, AI is just like going to the park or, riding on a Ferris wheel. I mean, it's a wonderful feeling. It's so easy to get the input from some great research within 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. I can get the meat of an argument from having real facts that I can share that fit into my outline of what my argument actually is. I can bring in the proof of that point of view. I can sound a lot more convincing. It can even provide in that way sort of a strange feeling of confidence that, well, it would take me so much longer to do this that I may not have ever had the luxury of that time to do this piece the way I wanted. Now I can really communicate something very quickly, very boldly, and very hopefully convincingly and this is where I think everybody waffles at one time or another, is this, where do I keep taking away from AI? What do I keep putting back in that's really human, that's mine? Where does that stop and where does that begin? And we need this or that. So you're still needed as someone who's guiding the humans as they interact with AI in your job, right? Because you're working with a large organization in the United States with many plants. You've told me about this, many locations. So tell us a little bit about recently your example that you shared with me, which was so fascinating, of a review, the talent review that you had to do. And then that was one thing, and how AI was used there. And then also you had a boss who was very supportive of you and allowing you to use the coaching that you've been studying or getting your certification in to actually use that with your population, specifically for people who had real challenges that they needed to work out. And that may lead us a little bit to how Erickson works, how coaching works in business.
Yes, absolutely. So a little bit of backstory. A part of my role is to complete what's called talent reviews every year. So every year, usually like end of winter, beginning of spring, we start working on what there's calibration conversations or talent reviews, where we start with doing more of the assessing. Their people are going to be assessing their direct reports on performance and potential, and then we put them in what we call the 9 box. And then within 3 to 5 years, they're going to be ready to be promoted again. skills, not just the technical skills, but we're also looking at those soft skills, the people skills, how they're leading, how they're communicating, how they're working with others. So based on that, like I said, we put them in that 9 box, and we have our collaboration conversation or talent reviews, where we have the leader of those people and the sponsor is the leader of that leader. So like if we're being supervisors, we'll have superintendents speaking about their performance and potential, and we'll have the operations manager as the sponsor. So what does that mean? What happened in the sponsor? The sponsor is the one that if we're in the middle of calibrating and seeing, no, this person should be more like a key player or a solid professional, and we can have a consensus, we will defer to that sponsor to make the final decision. So how have I used coaching in this? Well, first of all, coaching, last year I had my certification. Now it's more of like, tell me more. So when it's on your mind, how do you want to make this work? Being able to just listen to them and help them, guide them through find the answers. So in these talent reviews, it was a mixture of listening, but also instead of telling them what we need to do, it was more of like, okay, so what are some of the key things that we can do to be able to get them to be more emotional intelligence and helping them through that process? Or sometimes even asking them an easy question that I never thought about last year was, can you give me an example of what you're meaning with this? And pulling those keywords. So this ties into AI. How does all this ties to it, to AI? So usually I have somebody that takes the notes. We do what is called a roll-up for our managers for the plants, the head person for the plants. And we actually took these notes and utilize them so AI can help us get the summaries to figure out the gaps, figure out the wins and the progress that we've seen from last year to this year in our talent and our pipelines and building succession plans. Everything's going to be in one place instead of having multiple avenues where we're putting things to be saved at. And AI is going to help us because a lot of the people that I work with the operations side, and their way of doing things, it's not on paper. Their stuff is hands-on. So they struggle sometimes to come back and I say, hey, here's an individual development plan. I need you to write me objectives on what we call them model 70, 20, 10%. 70% doing learning by doing, 20% learning from others, 10% training. And they have struggled to understand that and how that training is tied back to learning by doing and then from others. So AI is going to come to place as they're talking about, well, I need this person to start working on their communication skills because they're going to be my next successor, but they don't know how to communicate up. I'm like, okay, so if they need to write objectives for them, they struggle to think about them to make those objectives that it's not feasible for me to sit down and with each one of them and tell them and guide them through that. So AI is going to come into place because they're going to be able to help us. We're going to put in sitting AI some of the example of objectives, and it's going to help us so it can help the leaders write those objectives. So then when we review them, it's going to be easier on us too.
An example of coaching one of the people that you were reviewing and helping him with let's say, a challenging employee, and you were working with him in the coaching mode. And tell us what happened. The one about the guy who was being asked, what's happening here? You're having an issue with this employee, and he was coming to you, really asking you for help. What am I going to do with this person? So what you did was coach him. And did you say it was a coaching session, or did you use your coaching skills? Was it something a little less obvious that way?
It was during a talent review because we were assessing her on her performance and potential. And a little bit of backstory. This girl, it's great on the technical, on the numbers, productivity, perfect. The problem is her people skills. And this supervisor, manager, would I say, struggles to be able to deal with the conflict. So we're in the process of like him telling me like, hey, like, yeah, she's great, but I struggle with some of her behaviors. If she has an issue or somebody challenged her, she has a meltdown. And instead of like being able to calm down, she comes to me and just like gets it on me. And like it's just a lot.
Wasn't she yelling at him actually, or something like that? It was pretty extreme, right? She was,
Yes.
yeah,
So this was one aspect of it. So it was shared to us that the people in the line called her the mean lady.
that was the one.
Um,
What I remember, sort of the punchline of that whole scenario, the way I remember it is you weren't telling him how to do it. In coaching, we don't tell. We're asking what we call open-ended questions. And the person who's the coachee is eventually is having to go deeper and deeper through these open-ended questions where we're not telling people what to do or mentoring them, discovering something they hadn't really tapped into before, which is their own way of managing a scenario like that. And he actually turned around and said to you something like, well, I thought you were supposed to tell me how to do this, what to do. And that was where we both laughed because that's the point, right? That is the
Yes.
whole point. And that was such a perfect example of that, where I think people have such sometimes strange ideas of what leadership really is. Leadership is not telling. And we'll talk a little bit later. Mentoring is different from coaching, is different from training,
Yes.
is different from therapy. It's a very specific way, and all of them border on each other, and all of these fields inform each other in a way. But this thing about coaching that, Stu, what you call this magical quality of AI has a magical quality. Well, coaching also has a magical quality, which is going within the human ability to come up with a solution. And some people are uncomfortable with that, right? In that scenario where what eventually happened, he did come up with some solutions, did he not?
He's like, I thought you were supposed to tell me what to do. I asked him, so he came up with this, like, why don't you meet with her first? Because I can't deal with her emotions. Like she gets too emotional. He struggles with the emotions. So he's like, why don't you meet with her, kind of introduce her what talent management is and how we wanted to grow and develop her. I want somebody else to take the lead and for you to step back. So I'm going to meet her, but I'm not going to do that, please. He's going to have to do it. So we're going to have to do another coaching session to help him figure out how he's going to be able to do that.
Great. So his experience was, yes, you're willing to help. He asked for help in that. He realized he needs help. So he said, hey, can you help me? He discovered that, right? Now, as far as what he's got to say, so it comes back on us each time. That's the whole point of coaching, is the person being coached realizes I'm the resource for my own solution. And that's such a great example, as simple as it is. So Stu, tell us something about how you've been using it. And told me that your background is such that you have spent 25 years in engineering organizations, Sun Microsystems, Cisco, Motorola. And so you're really an engineer's engineer. And here you are now going down the coaching path. How did that happen? And what has been your experience with it?
Yeah, I guess, taking it in perhaps reverse order. So why I decided to switch into sort of coaching after being in leadership for so long was actually partly because I was, frustrated by, sometimes poor leadership, how people, don't show up well for people, or how they interact with people and what they expect from people. Like it tends to be, a fraction of your role rather than a focus of your role. And so I wanted to shift that balance, if you like, and sort of have that be more of the focus, because for me, that was a more fulfilling part. Steer them.
Now you're starting a separate business. You're not full-time with a tech organization now, but people keep coming to you for mentoring, and you're such a senior engineer that now tell us a little bit about that part of it. So this is along with coaching, or as another part of coaching, you're going to be training and teaching people very specific skills in technology. What's going on with the technology right now? And one word you taught me, orchestration, is a big one right now. Tell us about orchestration for our
Yeah, I
audience
guess,
who isn't highly technology oriented. This is an incredible concept, really, and the
yeah,
challenge of your industry, right?
yeah, and I guess it's a somewhat easy way to conceptualize what's really happening or what's beginning to happen. So people may have heard of kind of agentic AI at some level, or agents or skills or something along those lines. And realistically, what you can think of is, in a software engineering point of view, you might have all these kind of effectively, robots, bots, producing code or doing some part of the process of, creating software solutions. It could be testing code, it could be, writing or understanding requirements, or it could be any of those, kind of parts of the process. And so what's really happening now is, instead of, the traditional model of you having, a team of human beings or multiple teams of human beings that are, all working in parts of this kind of upward delivery lifecycle, you might now have some amount of, AI doing one or more of those roles. And now the role of some of the software engineers has become more of, orchestration, like a conductor of an orchestra. You're managing these multiple agents in, pretty much in real time, trying to sort of make sure that they have the inputs, the context they need, the access that they may need to do whatever they need to do, and some level of what we talked about earlier, which is, making sure that the outputs that are being produced are actually what you wanted, what you expected, what you needed, into this more of a, orchestration is probably the easiest way of thinking about that, where you might, be sort of effectively farming out a whole lot of work to a large, in some cases, set of agents doing that work for you, or doing parts of that work for you, and then figuring out where the gaps might be, or where you need a human in the loop to kind of, augment that or check on that.
Would that include customer service?
It does, yeah. I
That's
mean,
half a joke, because it's the bane of my existence, and I'm sure many other people's too. They are not working well, if I may say. But maybe it's just this rough patch that we're in. But yes, I could go on and on about that. So what are y'all doing about the agentic AI when it comes to customer service? I hope you have a plan.
yeah, I mean, I think it's broader than just customer service, but one of the challenges that we, sort of touched on a bit earlier is the age-old adage of, garbage in, garbage out. Like, if you don't give, good training data, good inputs, good context to something, you can't really expect good outputs.
Right.
And the same happens with human beings. It's just that the speed or the, the scope of what an AI agent can take on can amplify that massively. So, if you want to take the example of the customer service kind of piece, if you train that on very, poor data or small amounts of data, you can't expect it to replace a human that's capable of, having a lot of experience, a lot of, knowledge around, a product or service or whatever it is, and that can actually respond to nuance and, subtlety in the communication from the client that wants support.
But for us out here as customers, even the rudimentary functionality has suddenly disappeared. And then you have call centers. So even the human resources piece is not plugged in properly. And so that's sort of, to me, as and I sound like a real complainer, but it's concerning, because this is such an important part of our everyday as human beings.
I think it varies depending on where they are and as part of the process, but I guess it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, if you have all people processes and you put basically AI, which is essentially an augmentation, it's a tool. If you put it into that poor process, it's just going to amplify all the things that weren't working well before.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have yet to experience that. I'm hoping one day soon I will find that it has improved greatly. So I think at that point, let's take a quick break. So we're back, and what I really want to talk to you about next is this experience of coaching and how we, as coaches, would explain it to other people. And one thing that impresses me the most about the Erickson method is being based on the work of Milton Erickson, who was well known. He's passed away now, but well known as a psychiatrist of unusual qualities, where the best psychiatrists would send their cases that they really didn't know how to solve or help to him, and he would figure something out. So there's a really brief description of this in some of the work of Marilyn Atkinson, who was a student of Milton Erickson, who 40 years ago started the Ericksonian training method. And it's very well known all over the world now, and probably more internationally than in the United States, actually. But it's how the left brain and right brain work, integrating the future actuality that we can conceive of, which really sets us apart from other mammals. We think in the future. We like to imagine the future. And when we do that, it actually activates parts of the brain. When we can activate that very purposefully and positively, we can far exceed our capabilities that we think we have at the moment now. And it can happen almost, well, magically in a way, because the brain starts to go to work for us. Once we imagine something strongly enough or make it visually strong enough, then the rest of the other parts of the brain start working, and suddenly we're able to do things. The best example really is that 1960s study of basketball players, I believe it was, where in sports, and this is why coaching has become legitimized really in many ways, is because of how it's used in sports and how successful they are with it. But they had ran a study where people sat there and imagined dunking a basketball through the rim over and over successfully every time. How does it feel? What does it look like to you? How did it happen? Why did that happen? And so on. That kind of training turned people into excellent players. And it happened whether they had, this is the part, it happened whether they had physically done the practice or not. That's the key. They didn't even have to have been in workout training mode to get better. It was simply by using this power of the brain, they became much better players. So what do you guys think of all that?
As you've very well articulated, that sort of notion that we can dream or imagine is, somewhat unique, or we believe it's unique to humans. But there's so much of what you get taught through coaching that is related to that idea of visualizing, imagining, and we often sort of simplify it and talk about it as the as-if frame. But that idea that you can sort of get someone to, visualize, feel, connect with it at all different levels to a future self or a future time, and say, imagine you've already succeeded at whatever it is you want to do. And then what got you there? Or what are some of the things that supported you to get there?
In reality, if we think about it with coaching, it helps people move from their emotions, reactions to intentional responses. We're really helping them become self-aware and reflect on their processes and behaviors that they're trying to do to help others in the long term or find their own answer. So instead of us telling them, we're stepping back and we're walking with them as they're telling us what they're seeing. So we're getting that picture drawn by them as we're observing them. We really focus on that people-centered piece of it. So it has, for me, it has definitely helped me step back and see the big picture and not try to go and say like, no, make this change here, make this change here. And it has not only helped me become more aware, but helped me help others become more aware with their own words and their thought process and the way that they're shifting their mindset and becoming more confident as they're realizing that they have the answers within themselves.
Great. Well, we'll be talking about this as we go along because the coaching lens is part of the title of the show. And we want people to understand what it really is all about, how it's used. And in this day and age where people are really looking for efficient, very quick solutions in solving big problems for ourselves and for other people that rely on us to think things through to the benefit of all of us, then it's one of those muscles, I guess you could call it, the visualization muscle. We need to develop more strongly than ever on every level. And then finally, one other passion of mine is the international community. And I live in the United States, in the state of Georgia, big country. Sometimes it feels like a big island, but Americans are really not very interested often. You know, we have a huge Spanish-speaking population, and yet we don't really teach it in school. We probably should, you know, make children start learning it. This is part of our culture now. But and then I grew up in Japan and speak Japanese, so I've traveled around the world a lot, and I value that part of my experience as a human being. Stu, you are a British citizen, right? Working in Canada.
Mhm.
Tell me more about your experience.
Dual language country. I've lived in other countries. My father was in the Royal Air Force, so we moved around a lot. So I've lived in the countries, and then with some of my work, I've traveled and worked in multiple countries as well. So I'm quite used to the idea of being around different cultures, different languages, and just enjoy that richness and diversity. One of my first interesting or funny experiences of being in Canada was, being in the Canadian office for the first time, and I'm sat in this empty meeting room, and one of my peer managers comes and sits next to me, and we're just waiting for the meeting to start, and he just turns to me and said, "Yeah, wish I hadn't worn these pants today. They're too tight." And my brain is kind of going, "That's too much information." Because in the UK, pants is underwear, but obviously in North America, it means trousers, jeans, whatever. But it took that moment, and I was definitely lost in translation for a second. I did share it. I share it with him afterwards why my face kind of changed the way it did. Yeah, there's been a few moments like that. That's probably the most memorable one for me.
Thank you for sharing, Stu. That's a great one. For me, I think it's the way that I have adapted to things and the perception of things, because Mexico, my family is very female center. They're male center. They're like, nope, whatever the man says, that's what you're gonna do. And then transitioning here, and it's kind of like my example. It's always, I'm the first female in my family that challenges getting married, challenges going to college, challenges moving out before getting married. And they're like, oh my gosh, what is she doing? So it's kind of like, well, I'm adapting, and it's okay to adapt because it's seen more like a natural thing in more of the American culture, because it's kind of like, it's okay, you guys better spread your wings, turn 18, you go ahead. And then my family was like, you're not going anywhere. And I was like, well, guess what? I am.
And good for you, and we welcome you. That's some of the good parts of the United States. We have that tradition that we say, come on down, come on in, to me, having been born and raised in Japan, they're very, very different cultures at the time I was being raised in Japan, and now less so, but still so many differences. And once you've experienced culture from a lot of different angles, I think it helps us to see the world differently, and knowing that culture is a choice, really, in a lot of ways. And recently I got on this bench of looking at YouTube videos of rare cultures or rare tribes in the Amazon and places like that, Papua New Guinea or wherever around the world that are still Central South America, still have pockets of these cultures where things are backwards and upside down, and they're perfectly fine. I mean, they've decided that men are the beautiful ones. I even saw one the other day. It was really, I had no idea, but I got on this, went down the rabbit hole of multicultures. How many are there? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of distinctly different cultures and languages, 7,000 and plus languages still, even with having lost a lot of them. So I'll tell the one about my mother. My parents went to Japan post World War II, and they were religious, very religious people. They were missionaries, but they were also part of this influx of Americans who were almost part of the occupation. In fact, MacArthur said, "Bring me 10,000 missionaries," because he knew, he was a smart man. He wanted the infrastructure built back as quickly as possible. So schools and by establishing churches and by hospitals and a lot of the services that they needed very quickly, he knew he could get the missionaries to help with. And indeed they did. So that was part of it. So we went to northern Japan where there were very few foreigners. And there was very little resentment to us at that time. And in fact, probably more recently, the Japanese don't like the number of tourists that come to Japan. They've had a huge influx. In those years, they were so welcoming. And my parents and many people knew very little about Japan, really. It had been a big rival or enemy in the war, obviously. People really, many of them hated Japan in the West. And so there had been very little cross-cultural understanding. There was a very wealthy family in the area where we lived, and they came to welcome us and really immediately became my parents' sort of like teachers and mentors in adjusting to the Japanese culture. And the first time my mother and father went to visit them, they were in their early 30s, and Mom was a Southerner from the Deep South. Anyway, they welcomed her into this beautiful home. It was really an estate. They were very wealthy people. And she stepped up onto the house where you always take your shoes off. She went straight in with her shoes on. Now, that's about the worst possible thing that you could do. And they were so wonderful about it. They was like, "Oh, let me take you back to the entrance, and this is how we do it." It was the sweetest, kindest thing. This is part of the Japanese culture that still exists today. But that one in fact, my mother didn't tell us that till many years later. I think she was so embarrassed about it. And so it's typical that as we're learning new cultures, we will put our foot in our mouth, almost literally. And so that's okay, right? But the fun of it and the pleasure of learning about other cultures, I think, is just something I wish everyone could experience. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a very rich conversation, and I look forward to having many more with you in the future. Thanks so much for joining us today. If this conversation resonated, subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe also to our newsletter, Being Human in the Age of AI, The Coaching Lens, which you'll find on LinkedIn, and visit grantglobalcoaching.com to learn more. Stay connected, and be sure to visit our guest, Stuart Ashman's website at leadingwithquality.com. New episodes and more fascinating guests are on the way, and we'd love to have you with us for the journey. Until next time, be well, stay curious, and enjoy your life. Take care. See you again soon.